last time we didn't get to talk much about China, so it
Oh,
just
great.
comes,
Let's do it. Yes,
yeah,
that's fun.
it's very handy because did you pay attention to the hearing, the Senate hearing,
Well,
to
yeah,
the TikTok?
yeah, the one where the guy said, asked the guy if he was a member of the Chinese, the CCP, and he says, "I'm from Singapore."
Yeah, he
Yeah, I can
well,
comment on that.
yeah,
Good.
because he not only he asked about it, he keep on asking him that
Yeah.
Cho, the TikTok CEO, he told him I'm Singaporean, but this is Tom Cotton, and he just kept on asking, do you have any other countries citizenship? Did you ever apply to Chinese citizenship? Did you have you ever been a Chinese Communist Party member? Blah blah. Just so the internet, the TikTok had a field day. Everybody was imitating, doing the skit because he just relentless asking him basically the same question. What do you think about that?
Well, I think a couple of things we learned from this, and that is that this was not a valid, realistic hearing. He didn't ask the guy that question because he wanted the answer, because he was curious about the answer, because that he felt that the answer was pertinent to anything he was trying to understand. This was simply grandstanding. And so the person that he was talking to was nothing more than a prop for his anti-China actions. So the question, they weren't really questions, they were actually attacks thinly disguised as questions. Are you fill in the blank? No, I'm not. Why are you fill in the blank? I thought I told you I wasn't filling the blank. Oh, so you admit that you're fill in the blank. It has nothing to, it didn't matter what as an example, one time I had a guy ask me a question about, online, and he asked me about a question about an issue of race. And I said, in the context of what we're talking about, I don't really want to talk about that. That's not. And he says, aha, you're a race baiter because I refused to answer the question because it's talk about it. And what I realized was this. He had that answer already loaded. It didn't matter what I said. He was going to say, you're a race. If I said the sky is blue, he was going to say, you're a race baiter, because that question was prepared for the audience, not for me. And you see this anti-China fervor going on amongst the ruling, certain portions of the ruling elite in the United States. That what we can learn is this, that you can't reason with people like that. That Voltaire said, any belief that is not founded in reason and logic will not be swayed by it. So anytime someone's asking a question and they're not asking it for the purpose of understanding the person that they're communicating it to, then it's not really a question. And that what we're seeing is a ruling elite anti-China performance going on in the guise of a congressional hearing.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think they really want to hear his answer. I mean,
No.
he probably didn't hear his answer. He just have to get those questions out, and yeah,
Yes,
and he
yeah, you
defended.
made a good point. He probably had written them out. He had written out a series of questions, and whatever answer he got was irrelevant. He had to get to the next question because those questions were that was how he was going to launch his anti-China tirade. And he would ask a question, and then as the person he saw as his adversary would answer the question some way or shape. That didn't care, and then off he goes to the next one.
Yeah. And he defended himself the next day. I mean, because there's so many attention paid to what he was that very short footage of his repeatedly asking the same question. And so somebody, I think on the mainstream CBS or somebody asked him about that, and he didn't think there was anything wrong. He's like, oh, there is some problem with him and this and that. So blah blah. And he didn't. I mean, the hearing's supposed to be about the influence, like internet influence about young people, their mental health and stuff like that. I don't know why Cho's nationality has anything to do with it. I mean,
And
so
his nationality didn't even really have anything to do with it, to tell you the truth. As far as they were concerned, they could have had a cardboard cutout of him and put that cardboard cutout in the chair and ask the questions and just talk to the cardboard cutout, because this was just a setup faux hearing. It wasn't a hearing. Don't try to understand or evaluate what they were saying in an intellectual context, because this was not an intellectual operation. It was brute force. It was knuckle dragging brute force and anger and an attack on China. Nothing more. If you view it as that context, through that lens, it all makes perfect sense.
and the same the few days ago, Nancy Pelosi also, the people who were protesting outside her house, the code pink, I think that. And she told them to go back to China. That's where headquarters is, something like that. And that was like a day earlier. She was saying people who want ceasefire are the people who are spreading Putin message. Is Nancy Pelosi totally crazy now? She doesn't even care that she really think we would believe these things that she's saying, or she just saying it.
Well, again, don't look at this in a rational context. That's how you'll get confused if you try to think this thing out and actually ask yourself, did she really believe what she was saying? No, she didn't use those words. She didn't say that. Right now, the ruling elite have given her a list of adversaries. Russia and China are at the top of the list. Now, I'm sure she's already used Russia. She's already used China. The next group of protesters, she'll ask them, are they go back to Tehran? That's certainly an enemy. North Korea, go back to Pyongyang, Caracas, Venezuela, Madrid, whatever. She has a list of adversaries, and she's just to go down the list. And because she can't have a true discussion with the protesters because they have valid complaints and valid concerns, and she'd have to take into account the morality of her position. She can't have a conversation with these people. So instead, she simply does what in her circles is viewed as an attack. In her circles, to say, you work for China, you work for Russia, you work for Iran, whatever. Well, that's the most vicious attack. When she goes back to the people in her circle, oh boy, you really showed them, Nancy. You called them Chinese puppets or something like that. Again, it's irrational. And that is where the U.S. empire is now. The U.S. empire is I don't know if it ever was, but it's not rational. But I think it's being exposed to the American people. Now that the American people have access online to, various news outlets, alternative media such as yourself and I, and they can learn the truth about China and Russia and Iran and all of these so-called adversaries and the revolutionary movements around the world. And now that has happened, these imperialists, these genocidal monsters, they're backed into a corner. They can't have a discussion anymore. They're just trying to hide behind any kind of imperialist rhetoric that they can. It's a sad state of affairs, to be quite frank, when you look at Nancy Pelosi backed into a corner to the point where the only thing she can say to the protesters is something like that. You have to shake your head in sadness and feel and recognize the fecklessness of the ruling elite in the United States.
Yeah, yeah. She has, I mean, unfortunately, San Francisco, we know, is a beautiful city, but they have a homeless problems that is out of control. Why doesn't she spend some time there, doing something about that rather than be obsessed with Russia, with China? I mean, I don't know. I mean,
Well, the answer to that is because the ruling elite are concerned about they're protecting, if we use the term empire and say there's the empire is something, let's make it into something, right? This thing that's an empire, right? The ruling elite are protecting only the empire, and that doesn't include the people that doesn't include the citizens, that doesn't include the constituents. Because even when the US ruling elite and the European ruling elite go around the world and they steal resources and they pillage and maraud and they steal resources from various countries, the people in their countries don't benefit. They use that money, they steal, and then they hide their money in a shell company in Cyprus or the Isle of Man or some other small former British, a protectorate now that's still kept to launder money. So the people in the U.S. empire are not benefiting from the actions of the ruling elite. And the ruling elite are now getting angry at the people in their empire for not going along with the things that they want. And they're only now concerned with protecting their imperial machinations, their ability to go around the world and harass people and threaten people and force people using economic coercion or military coercion to do what they want. And now that China's becoming economically and militarily powerful, Russia's militarily and economically powerful, Iran, North Korea. Now that these companies are coming together in an alliance in what I would call a bloc to defend themselves from American imperialism, the ruling elite in the United States are in a panic. And let me add this. If you look at what's happening in the United Nations, as all of the reasonable countries vote to end what is obviously some kind of a really horrific genocidal slaughter in Gaza, if you look at that, the US ruling elite and European ruling elite are being isolated on a global stage, but they're also being isolated in their own countries because the people in their countries are saying, we're not going to go along with this. The people of their countries are starting asking questions. Well, why is it that your foreign policy is hurting me? It's costing me jobs. It's costing opportunity. It's costing money. So the ruling elite now are becoming so isolated that they're not only isolated on the international scale, they're isolated internally also. And that is a very, very difficult place to be. And they're having great difficulty in navigating this new dynamic in which basically nobody likes them.
But it's also dangerous. Don't you think that they could do something very extreme, like bring us into a war to get, distract us or, stuff like that, right? That
Certainly,
either,
and that is, yes, a history of imperialism, a history of empire, a history of colonialism. That is correct. I've said for a while, for quite a while, I feel that we are fortunate to have the cool heads, to have the strategic thinkers, and I really believe this, the leaders, particularly of China, of Russia, and Iran, who understand the danger of the US empire and understand how they can control the empire's military escalation as it gets more and more desperate and afraid, that they build a more powerful bloc, that they're not confronting the US empire militarily, that they're using an intellectual way, using intellectual, moral, and economic building blocks to bring together those who are like-minded, which is most of the world that's been oppressed by the U.S. and colonial powers for the last 500 years, for God's sake. But I do think that we are fortunate to have leaders such as President Xi, such as President Putin, such as the leaders in Iran and other countries who understand the danger. And I think that, yes, the danger will exist, but I think that these great leaders of these countries will be able to navigate the world into what is the dawn of a new world. What is the dawn of a more fair world order where everyone gets a chance to rise and to share in prosperity. And I truly believe that. That's not just rhetoric.
yeah. Yeah, the war takes two. So if the other side is more calm, yeah, more logical,
Mm-hmm.
more controlled. Yeah. Yeah. But yeah. Now, about the Chinese economy, now there are some pretty stunning numbers. The stock market in China crashed, and then there is a brewing kind of problem with the real estate market. I mean, these are all true, but
Certainly.
I got to say when I was there in last November, everywhere is packed. People are going to restaurants and the parks and etc. It seems to me like everybody, and of course, recently the one of the things a lot of countries complaining is that the Chinese tourist is not coming to different countries anymore. They seem like stay in China. Now, China is a big country, and there are lots of places you can go to, lots of fun places. It seems like Chinese consumers decided to stay inside China. All right, so they
Mm-hmm.
spend lots of money. So that's pretty much in line with my observation in November. So all these like a stock market crash, I mean, there is a thing called a correction. The market will crash at some point if it can't keep on going up. The same thing with real estate. So do you think and so what I feel like inside China, there is not much of a panicking, at least not people around me, they're not like a panicking talking about that, including my own viewers, etc. But it seems that outside the West is like, oh my goodness, China is going to this and that. I mean, so what is your view on that?
Number one, the West, the rhetoric from the ruling elite and from the political elite throughout the U.S. empire. Because when you say the West, I just think of the U.S. and its vassals and its colonies in Europe. The rhetoric about the crash and destruction of the Chinese economy is two things. Number one, it's wishful thinking, delusional wishful thinking. Number two, it is propaganda to convince their people that China is weak and China has problems, because part of the big issue is this: the U.S. empire, being the leader of global neoliberal capitalism, predatory capitalism, wants to argue that socialism can't work and it doesn't work and it falls apart. However, Chinese socialism with Chinese characteristics has outperformed their free market, whatever you want to call it, many times over. And it is extremely embarrassing and humiliating for them to admit that China has figured out a way on its own to be economically, culturally, and successful, internationally, diplomatically successful, right? And so they have to try to brainwash the American people into not seeing the reality that China is very successful. Additionally, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, if the Ukraine loses, 100,000 men, the U.S. will say, yes, boy, Ukraine sure is winning. It's the Russians that lost 100,000 men. So they don't use this rhetoric for the purpose of communicating their thoughts. This is rhetoric. I like to say they're apathetic about the truth. In other words, they'll say whatever they need to say to accomplish their goal. If it happens to be true, that's fine. If it happens not to be true, they're just as happy. They're going to use words to rhetorically accomplish a goal, not to rhetorically communicate things that they believe to be either true or false. So this is just false rhetoric. The other thing I think about one of the things about Chinese economy that makes it resilient is that the Chinese government has a grip on the steering wheel. They don't believe in magic when it comes to economics. So the U.S. neoliberal capitalism, this so-called free market capitalism stuff just says, well, if we just let the super just steal everything and fill their pockets, magically everything will work out. And then, of course, when we have a terrible crash, then instead of actually saying, well, let's just see what happens, like that you would think based on their rhetoric that they would just get out of the way. Instead, they say, we got to give trillions of dollars to the same people that just crashed our economy and bailed them out, but we'll let the poor people suffer. Well, China doesn't think like that. China, it's not magic. China thinks this out. They do actual consideration of what's in the best interest of balancing and strengthening their economy. And they have the ability and the authority to make economic decisions to control their banking and interest rates and their currency. And so I think China has a grip on things. Any economy, there's going to be ups and downs, but I think China has a grip on the economy in a way that they can make slight adjustments as necessary to overcome these bumps in the road. And I think that's what makes their economy more resilient and much less subject to intense pain when they have economic, ups and downs, when they have economic waves, decreases or increases, however you want to put it.
Yeah, actually, in terms of the real estate, actually, lots of people want to see the real estate goes down. The housing prices goes down because some parts of it really has gone too high. So people can't afford. Now, of course, China again, it's big. It depends on where, but like major cities, the price has gone up
Yeah.
really crazy. And so actually, if there is some crash, I mean, or a minor crash in this real estate market, I think probably some people will welcome that because make
Well,
housing
correction
more
is the term.
affordable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the term is economic correction.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with the correction. But as I said, the difference in China is that the Chinese leadership has a grip on the economy and they don't just wait. Well, they don't argue that it will magically correct itself while every time it goes bad, they just use it as an excuse to shove trillions of dollars into the hands of the, most corrupt people on earth. China actually tries to address the circumstances and the issues. And I think I'm not saying what they're doing is perfect, but I just think when you're actually trying to address the needs of the masses, you're much more likely to have success in altering the course of an economy that has gone off track a bit, or particular areas of your economy that have gone off
Yeah.
track.
I agree. I also think it's a correction. So
Yeah,
it will go down at some point. And if it's going to go down, let's just go quickly, right? I mean, let's get it
exactly.
over with. Yeah. Okay, so what do you feel about the election in Taiwan? Okay, I personally don't think the election in Taiwan make any difference because it is in the end between China and the US. What do you think?
Yeah, well, a couple of things. The certainly the U.S. got their guy in whatever his lie or whatever his name is, who is the a supposedly pro-independence or whatever rhetoric you want to use. However, he didn't get the parliament. So there is a divided rule, shall we say, there. And that's going to make it very, very difficult for the U.S. To, implement all of the machinations they want to try to drag Taiwan into being, ground zero on a war between two nuclear superpowers. It's going to be very, very difficult. And as that falls apart, as that plan falls apart, the U.S. empire is mired in two wars, one in Ukraine and one in the Middle East, both of which they're going to lose. And so I think the U.S. empire is getting weaker. We're seeing, look, let's be honest, they can't defeat Yemen. Yemen has basically, Yemen is holding the U.S. at bay. They're afraid to throw a rock at Iran, knowing that Iran can flatten everything they have in the Middle East. So um, it would be folly to think that the U.S. could go toe to toe, go to China or Russia's border and fight either one of them at that point when they really don't have much of a chance against Yemen. They can just bomb some like scraggly rocky mountains or something and then come back and tell their people they attacked the Yemen military while the people in Yemen, pretty much laugh at them and keep doing what they're doing. I think the U.S. empire is being exposed as the toothless tiger that it is. And the only thing the U.S. empire could do would be commit suicide, because as I say, a nuclear weapon is not a weapon; it's a suicide pill. It is saying, okay, I'm lost. I'm going to swallow the suicide pill and die. That's the only thing. And as I always say about the neocons, they're scared. They don't want to die. They're scared to death. They don't. None of them have been in the military. None of them would ever join the military. They are scared of breaking a fingernail. So I don't see them pushing the button because they know they're all dead and they're all stealing money, living very wealthy, and they don't want to interrupt their push lifestyles. So at this point, I think that the U.S. empire is being exposed all over the world, and it's just a matter of wise leaders managing, well, outside of the U.S., managing the downfall of the U.S. empire, and it is a precipitous downfall, I might add.
Yeah, so whoever wins, I guess in Taiwan, it doesn't really matter, right? So it's the US who's
Yeah,
behind.
because this is about time. This is about the Russians, I think, really brilliantly, strategically tying the U.S. down in Ukraine indefinitely. Everybody thought, oh, well, the Russians will just attack with this gigantic attack. They have a very powerful military, and they could have launched a much more dramatic attack against Ukraine far earlier, had they elected to do so. But instead, they've taken their time, they've dragged it out, they've sharpened their military skills. They've tied the U.S. empire up dragged them down into the mud in Ukraine, and again, also in the Middle East. And so the U.S. is out of missiles, out of all kinds of stuff. And let me add this: I would have to suspect that there are those in Taiwan who are looking at Israel, looking at Ukraine, and as the saying goes in the U.S., thinking there, but therefore, but by the grace of God go I. I would think there are people in Taiwan understanding that the idea that the U.S. empire has either the ability or the inclination to protect Taiwan from anything is an absurd folly. And I think that bit by bit, the people in Taiwan will come to understand that they're being set up as nothing but cannon fodder. And as the U.S. continues to fall from grace over the course of the next several years, while they're tied up in these other, um, uh, uh, um, military engagements, they will be the U.S. will be much less able to focus on the Asian region, and they'll get fewer and fewer allies. Because let me add this: as the U.S. gets weaker, Russia, China, Iran, they all get stronger at the same time.
I mean, I agree. We see it, right? We see it's a suicide for Taiwan to go what Russia, I mean, Ukraine has been doing, right? To just follow the West and do whatever the US has. But unfortunately, the leader, the Taiwan leader, they seems like just want to be the next Zelensky or something. They seems like do want to, I mean, I don't know whether they don't see it or they don't care. But they seems like it still pretty much okay. Whatever the U.S. asks me to do, Tsai Ing-wen has been. I mean, she has been doing that. And this one, Lai, he's the same party as Tsai Ing-wen's party, and he probably will do more or less the same. So that's, I mean, as a regular people in Taiwan, what can people do? You know, just like regular people in Ukraine, they voted for Zelensky because his platform was peace. Okay, his platform was I'm going to bring peace to you, but clearly he didn't. He didn't bring peace. He bring the war. That's devastating war. But what can people do? I mean, that's the problem with election, I guess. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, a couple of things. If you look at the numbers and the way that the vote was split up, 60% of the people, I mean, the winning lie or whatever his name only came in with what, somewhere around 40%. So the majority of the people in Taiwan are in opposition to the, this crazy, I'm not going to call it an independence movement. I'm going to, a movement. What I'll call it is puppets for the U.S. empire, just a puppet government that is more inured to Imperial Japan than they are to Taiwan. These are basically, to me, just Japanese puppets that happen to be in Taiwan working for the U.S. empire. I do think that the people of Taiwan can and will begin to understand that their future lies with the mainland. I do think that also China, their leadership is very wisely um, increasing their economic ties to Taiwan. That's really smart. A lot of people thought, oh, they're just going to cut Taiwan off completely and they're going to sanction them out of existence. But if they did that, then Taiwan would need to get more things from the U.S. They'd need to get more stuff from the U.S. if China cut them off. I think China's really very, very wisely continuing to strengthen the economic cultural, historic ties between the mainland and Taiwan, and that's a long-term strategy that will benefit them. I think China's looking at this as a long-term strategy. They won't be baited in, to just doing something emotional, and that their long-term strategy will work mainly because the U.S. empire is I guess the word would be contracting. If you think about it, the high point of the U.S. was probably when they went to take Syria. The U.S. went to take Syria. They said, okay, we're going to take Syria. And Russia came in and the resistance forces came in and stopped them. The U.S. empire had been growing since World War. At that point, it began contracting. Russia says, no, you're not going to take Ukraine next to our border. So as the U.S. loses a significant portion of Ukraine, which was part of their empire, they took it. They're contracting. The U.S. empire was growing. It is now contracting. They're losing territory around the world. And I think that that particular dynamic will manifest itself in Taiwan also, that they're losing territory and they see Taiwan as a potential territory that they can add to the U.S. empire. But the empire is contracting now, and Taiwan isn't part of theirs, and I don't think it will ever be. I think the U.S. empire will continue to contract.
So your advice to the people in Taiwan is to really work closely with the mainland, right? And trying to
Yes,
figure
we'll
out
work
some
closely
way.
with the mainland. And here's the thing. My advice would be don't do anything in a rush. Take your
Mhm.
time,
Mhm.
wait, see how things play out. Wait 5 or 10 years. 10 years. 10 years is a blink of an eye in from through a historical context. So my advice to the people of Taiwan would be don't let anybody drag you into saying we're going to declare independence or we're going to do something that's going to drag you into a fight or put you in jeopardy. That's what the US empire will try to do. Just say to the US empire, no, we're not interested in independence. We're just going to continue to do what's in our best economic interest, which is to build relations with the mainland. And we're going to wait 5 or 10 years, see what happens, and then revisit what our course and what our future is. By then, I think it'll be pretty clear that the U.S. empire is a pile of, the U.S. empire is going to look just like San Francisco, where you've got a group of very wealthy people, where you've got people from Google and Twitter and all of these Fortune 500 companies driving around in the latest $150,000 Tesla, and the rest of the population being intense in poverty and squalor. That's the direction the U.S. is going, and I think if Taiwan keeps an eye on that, at some point they'll look at it and say, "Ooh, I don't think I want to be over there and join that mess."
Yeah. Okay, since I have you here, now you talked on your program about this bombing in 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 Syria, right?
Yes.
And to revenge, but you don't think it's a real revenge, right? Can you explain that to my audience?
Certainly. So the U.S. Military, if you look at the U.S., one of the problems that the leaders of our country have, there's a great book, How to Hide an Empire, right? One of the problems that the leaders of the U.S. has is that it can't admit what it really is to its citizens. If the citizens of the United States understood the foreign policy of their government, they would reject it. It is immoral, it is unethical, it is brutal, it is murderous and genocidal. Okay. Morally reprehensible. So the US always has to try to play like we're some kind of a fair players. So some Americans died in an illegal base, an illegal occupation of Syria. So the US empire had to say to its people, basically pretend that wherever we are, we're there legally and we're there for good cause and moral cause. Therefore, we have to strike back. Now, they bombed deserts. They bombed things that were not in any way related to these military operations against the U.S. They didn't do it to lessen the strength, to weaken the military units that were fighting them. They did it so that on the home front, they could say, look what we did. We're tough. We're protecting our troops. Our troops are doing good moral duties, and we have to stand up on their behalf. It was all an internal public relations operation. That's what it was all about. They bombed them for a public relations operation, nothing more, nothing less. And again, it was really stupid, and it's going to hurt the cause of imperialism because they're just going to infuriate the people in the region even more, and to drive home the reality to the people in the region that the U.S. needs to be ejected from that region of the world and make them, the people in that area, more resolute in their determination to eject U.S. imperialism from the middle from West Asia.
So they don't, the US, the Biden administration doesn't really want to have a war with Iran, right? Is that what you're saying?
I agree with that. I would agree with that statement. I think they don't. I think they understand that in its region, you could argue that Iran is a regional power, but I would argue that it's a regional superpower and that Iran has escalatory dominance in that region. If Iran wanted to, it has the ballistic missile capability to flatten every U.S. base in the region, and the U.S. knows it. So now they're playing with fire. They know that if they infuriate Iran, and if they push Iran too far, that they will immediately be ejected from the region, because if all your bases are nothing but piles of smoking ash, you don't have anything in the region anymore. And then what do you do at that point? The U.S. Understands that to attack Iran potentially could expose the weakness of the U.S. and wipe out the entire empire. I mean, if the U.S. kicks Iran and Iran says, okay, that's it, all your bases are gone, has no bases left, then what's to stop China or Russia from saying, if you punch us, you're going to lose all your bases in our region too? You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
they're walking a very thin line between being able to still convince people in the world that they're some kind of a military superpower that can dominate, and getting in a fight that exposes their weakness.
Now, how do you feel about the Tucker Carlson? Potentially, there is an interview. Tucker Carlson is interviewing Putin. There is a panic in mainstream media. There are people even suggesting not to let him come back to the U.S. because supposedly he's interviewing Putin. Well, what is this? He's not the first person from the West to interview Putin. Barbara Walters, I think Charlie Rose, before he was canceled, Charlie Rose was his program was very influential, right?
Oliver Stone, I believe. Didn't
Yeah,
Oliver
Oliver
Stone?
Stone, yeah, etc. So there are other people who interviewed the Putin before. So what's this panic about that? What do you
Well,
take on that?
a couple of things, and I was on Fox News for many years myself, and I used to go on Tucker Carlson show. And though ideologically I'm far to the left of him, I will say this: having met Tucker Carlson on many occasions, he's a very nice person. I disagree with him on a lot of things ideologically, but I think he is honest, and I think that he's a decent human being. But I just don't agree with him on some things ideologically. But that's okay. Um, well, here's the problem. Again, the US empire has to put forward certain tropes, certain arguments in order to convince its people that it's doing the right thing. The biggest fear they have is that the American people understand the truth about Russia and China, particularly the other two world powers. Vladimir Putin is, he's portrayed as some kind of an evil madman who has machinations to restore the Soviet Union, et cetera, et cetera. What happens when there is an intellectual discussion between him and a highly respected and trusted, like I said, even though I disagree with Tucker Carlson on a lot of things, I trust that he's trying to be honest, right? When he has a conversation with Vladimir Putin and the people, he asks the right questions. And he says, our leadership says you're trying to do this, this, and this. How do you respond? And the people of America hear the truth. I would love to see him interview President Xi,
Mm.
Wang Yi, some of the powerful leaders of Sergei Lavrov, some of the powerful leaders of Russia and China, so that the American people can have the opportunity to hear these people and understand them and realize, well, we're being told that these people are just crazy monsters. They're brilliant leaders that are worthy of a very deep discussion and worthy of understanding and have a vision for their countries and love their countries, but don't hate yours, right? So I think that the fear amongst the ruling elite is that their lies will be exposed. You might have heard this before. What is it? The greatest disinfectant, sunshine is the best disinfectant, right? Truth, reality, and an intellectual discussion may be the way that the American people are freed from the lies and rhetoric, and they're scared to death that Tucker Carlson will be the one that exposes them. And of course, they can talk, oh, he should not be allowed in, blah, blah, blah. Well, there are no legal ways, that actions that they could take to stop Tucker Carlson from doing what he's doing or to take action against him, because what he's doing is perfectly legal. And might I add, if he gets the interviews and these interviews are put out on the internet, which I'm sure they will be, well, there's all you need. If you think he's up to no good or he's trying to do something, you only need to watch the interview and figure out what was said there. That's the problem that they have. They're horrified of being exposed. And what happens if he ends up in China next? What happens if he ends up maybe in Iran or Venezuela or Cuba or some of these other countries? God forbid, North Korea, Nicaragua, and now all of these people that we were told are evil, crazy communists are found to be people who love their countries and their culture, but are not in opposition to Western culture. They just simply say, yours is yours, live yours the way you want to, and we're going to do the best we can for our people. As the book said, that one book I spoke said, How to Hide an Empire. He may expose the empire, and they're scared to death of it.
I would love Tucker Carlson to go to China. I just if you meet him, tell him I could be his interpreter. I would love to be his guy.
Yeah,
With
I
him.
think it would be great. I'm a person that I haven't been to Russia or China, and I'm trying to figure out now how I can go to either one of them. I'm thinking about doing a fundraiser online or something for myself. But yes, I'm with you. I want to go to Russia and China myself. I'd love to do my YouTube shows and interview people and take videos. To me, it's critical to have an understanding of these various countries for the American people. I'd like to see more people in alternative media making their way to Russia and China to enlighten people in the West about the things that we are told in opposition to a lot of this imperialist rhetoric.
If you go to China, let me know. I can be your guide. I'll make a
Oh,
trip.
I'll let you know. I'll let you know when I start my fundraising. I'll put up a web. I'm planning on putting up a web page actually for a trip to Russia and a trip to China, and just hey, people donate, and when I get enough, I'll go. And so maybe I'll try to get enough for more than one person.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah.
But yes, that's something I'm really looking for. I really want to see China, Beijing, and Moscow, and ride
Hmm.
on the something that I'll never get to ride on in the United States, which is high speed rail.
But you're right. I think lots of the people, I mean, there are lots of bloggers and there are lots of self-media people in China right now. They are making programs to tell people. I was so surprised when I came here because that's not what I imagined China is because the West media is saying everybody's, being controlled and being
Mhm.
watched and there's no freedom and sounds miserable, but that's not the case at all. So actually, I would think, people like you and Tucker Carlson, if I mean, Tucker, he has a really big platform and he himself is kind of anti-China. I think it's not because he, just anti-China by itself. I really think he needs to know more about China. He really
Yes,
needs, yeah, I think that's his problem is that he doesn't know much about China. He actually has been brainwashed by the mainstream in terms of China. I think that's what his problem is. So I would love he goes to China and interview people. Maybe if not Xi Jinping, just talking to people on the street, right?
yeah.
Talk to some Westerners who's living in China for a long time, stuff
Hmm.
like that would be very helpful for him to know China. Yeah, I
Yeah,
would
I
love him.
agree.
Yeah, I think, and then, but like you said, that the empire cannot, tell people the truth, right? Because when people know the truth, then they would questioning, the legitimacy of the empire itself. I think that's where the problem is. And Tucker Carlson probably. But to be honest, what can Vladimir Putin really do? It is an interview after all. How much can you get out of it? I mean, other than saying, I'm not, I of course I'll watch it, but I don't think there will be a whole lot that really is shocking to all of us. I mean, what do you think? What
Well,
what can be in there?
let me tell you a little story, and I think it's important. So when I was, I retired from law enforcement. I was a law enforcement official. But when I first started in law enforcement, I was just a regular old police officer, and I was sent to assigned to work guy. And I was told he doesn't like black people. It's going to be difficult working with him. He's really racist guy and he hates white people, black people, or whatever. Okay, whatever, right? I went to work with him. I worked with him for several years and we became very, very good friends, right? Then another friend of mine went to work with him who was a black guy. They became friends. They were like brothers. They went fishing together. They went to bowling together. So here's the bottom line. My point is the reason I think part of him not liking black people is he never really was around any. He never talked to any black people. He only know what maybe he heard. And then once he started working with me and he worked with this other guy, and he was like, wow, they're regular people. Wow. He liked bowling and fishing and going to baseball games. And this other guy liked those things. And he came to realize, well, I've been had. I've been lied to. I've been told that black people were so different and so terrible. So what's my point? My point is that's with Vladimir Putin. That people who are in America who are told he's some kind of a monster, he's a brutal, vicious monster who just wants to eat you and your children, to hear this man speak, to hear him answer questions, and to realize, well, he's just a leader of a country. He's just a statesman. He's trying to look out for the best interests of his country. He doesn't want a war. He prefers not to have war. He feels that his country is threatened, right? To hear those kinds of things, I believe has the potential to change the attitudes of Americans in the same way that that guy's attitude about black people changed. Simply, he'd never really been around them or heard or interacted with any black people, and he just had this idea of what black people were. I think the idea of what Vladimir Putin and the Russians are supposed to be, this negativity, can be dissipated simply by a conversation, people saying, I watched him talk to Tucker Carlson, and he wasn't trying to eat Tucker Carlson. He was having a thoughtful discussion, a philosophical discussion, political and diplomatic discussion. Well, I think I've been had. That's the big fear. And I think that's what comes of these kinds of interviews.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. The mere
Humanizing
fact that
people.
yeah, the mere fact that he is actually a human being, right? He's because if we don't know this person, we can have an imagination, right? This is this monster, evil person. But then when you see him talking, just like anybody else, talking, have a good conversation, like you said, intellectual discussion with Tucker Carlson, that itself is scary, I guess. So it's it's not even about exactly what they were talking about, but the mere fact that they could have a very regular discussion, that itself making him look too human, I guess that itself is scary. Yeah, I think you're right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly.
because I was thinking, I don't think I mean, Putin will tell him something really shocking that we haven't expected. We don't know. I cannot think of anything. But you're right. The conversation itself is scary for the
Well,
elite.
and here's the important thing. As a journalist, rather than just a person who does the job of imperialism, as a journalist, Tucker Carlson would likely ask him thoughtful questions. Tucker Carlson would likely ask him the questions that the everyday people would be concerned, would think about. Now, if you send someone from CNN or Fox or MSNBC, they're going to ask not questions. They're going to impose questions on him. So why is it that you want to kill all Ukrainians and eat their children and puppies too? You know what I mean? So why is it that you're so evil? Rather than, so why did you invade Ukraine? What's that all about? And just okay, let me tell what's going why. The people in the United States, our leaders have said that you want to reconstitute the Soviet Union and that they're afraid that you'll attack Europe. Will you attack Europe? What is your response to that? Those are questions that a journalist should ask. But the journalists, they don't even want journalists in the United States to talk to Vladimir Putin for fear that they'll ask those questions and that he will honestly answer them. And they only want people to hear their answers, not the answers of Vladimir Putin, or as I said, or Xi Jinping, or Maduro, or whoever it is.
They simply don't want people to know the truth, right? The truth about this person, about the country, about yeah,
And
yeah,
about U.S. imperialism, about the foreign policy of the United States.
yeah,
Must be
yeah,
hidden at all cost.
yeah. Yeah, now that it all makes sense because I just like I was so I mean of course um I thought it would be interesting to watch this interview, but this panic, right? I was like, what's all this panic about? I thought they also afraid, the legacy media also afraid. I think there is some significance is Tucker Carlson is a self-media person now,
Yes.
right? That's another part of the probably is because he's not from any of the big three or any, cable or anybody. He is a self-media person, which I believe probably is the first. I would say a major leader, a world leader, is talking to a self-media person. I would think, right? That's
I
pretty
didn't
that is a significant too,
I
right?
didn't think about that, but that is
Yeah,
brilliant. You're right. And that is the growth of alternative, what we like to call alternative media, which are just people like you and I. We see it. We're people just like Tucker Carlson. You know what I mean? Certainly we're not rich like Tucker Carlson. I mean, I can't speak for you. I'm not rich like Tucker Carlson.
that,
But the point is that the legacy media is being exposed as nothing but a policy tool of US imperialism, policy tool of the US empire, tools. And I think that the growth of alternative media will be affected in an exponential way by an alternative media personnel getting access to one of the most powerful leaders in the entire world right now, certainly in the top three.
yeah. Yeah, I think that probably also panicking them. Because
Yes.
imagine if in the future all the major leaders in the world no longer taking interviews from CBS, NBC, CNN, only from the self-media people. Imagine that. They will be really sidelined. That is something they will panic in. Yeah, yeah, I think.
Absolutely. And I think that's going to happen. I think it needs to happen. And I also think that if the leaders in China, in Russia, in Iran, et cetera, are wise, and I think they are wise, that they will recognize that it's in the best interest of the rising new world for them to speak with the alternative media because that empowers the alternative media. It really does. And the alternative media is the hope for mankind at this point in the Western, at least in the Western world.
That would be interesting if I'm sure they talk to each other if and they watch each other if this interview comes out, have pretty good effect and etc. Maybe next there will be other people, other world leader might follow, right? They might not necessarily always Tucker Carlson, but they might find some alternative media person they like and they will talk to. That'll be very
But
interesting.
yeah, maybe
That'll
I'll
be
send an email to to Xi Jinping's point person and say, hey, I'm going to come to
yeah,
Beijing. I'll be hanging around
yeah.
there. How about we have a discussion?
Yes, why not? Yes. Send it to somebody in the maybe the US embassy. Just asking if you can interview somebody starting from
If I
there.
send it to the, if I send it to the, you mean the, do you mean the Chinese embassy in the U? If I send it to the U.S. embassy, they'll probably,
No, no, no.
show up at my house. So I'll be beaten mercilessly, but not much they can do because it's not illegal. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
you know what? I'm going to do that. I'm going to send a request to over
Yeah.
there if I can interview someone
Uh-huh.
from the embassy.
Yep.
That would be
Yep.
great from the Chinese embassy. I
Yes.
think that'd be a great idea. The higher the
Yeah.
better, but maybe the
Right.
diplomat. I spoke at the United Nations Security Council.
Oh, yes.
Um,
Yes.
so I
Yeah,
met
regarding
the
that, it's good that
yeah,
you mentioned that. I actually want to ask you about this because
sure.
one of the things that the Chinese media talking about, I don't see much of the Western media, is the Houthis. A lot of their weapons are from Ukraine. Which I find interesting. You talked about that in the UN with your testimony. You said there is a danger, a real danger that those weapons will be over to Europe, and Europe is not that far from Middle East, right? So it's actually it could be very well explained what you predicted that those weapons are from Ukraine get to the black market or however. Some of those weapons never went to the front line of Ukraine. They just immediately to the black market get smuggled somewhere and then so it wouldn't be too surprising. Ended up in some of them ended up in the Houthis, right? So
Well,
what's your view on that? You were correct.
yes, certainly. It's easily predictable that when you send a massive amount of weapons to a country as corrupt as Ukraine, that they're going to go on the black market and whoever's got money to buy them will get them. So my understanding is some of them have shown up with Hamas in Gaza, just wherever there's a conflict. I mean, there are weapons available. So the U.S. Basically is happy to make money and so they're selling these weapons and but I think ultimately the people who are going to suffer is going to be the Europeans that European nations are very hard to get your hands on a gun, and for the most part they've got very strict gun laws and they haven't had a lot of trouble with shootings because they have very strict gun laws. You can argue for it or against it. It depends on how you see the world. That's not important in the context of this conversation. What's important is that the U.S. empire has pumped billions of dollars of military grade weapons into Europe. And those military weapons, grade weapons, are going to spill out all over Europe, and they will pay a high price for that. And of course, since they're being putting it in the hands of corrupt people, whoever's the highest bidder is going to get the weapon. So this was not even. I mean, this was one of the easiest predictions that I have ever made.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Hamas. I mean, not Houthi. I got
Yeah,
it wrong.
yeah.
Yeah,
But
Hamas.
wherever, they'll
Yes.
be all over. They've
Yeah,
shown up in Africa.
yeah, yeah,
Wherever there's weapons, that people need weapons and they can buy them on the open market, which they
yeah,
can in Ukraine, they're
yeah,
going to do it.
yeah. And you can tell them, I told you so.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
that's why they threw me off Twitter. They threw me off Twitter because it was too much I told you so stuff. That happened one time too many.
Yeah, yeah.